his office confirmed today, Carol, that on day one, he intends to begin that mass deportation of illegal immigrants. We'll see what that means for America's workforce, which, by the way, does rely quite heavily on illegal immigrants. He's also confirmed that he's going to introduce tariffs on imported goods to America between 10 and 20%. Again, something economists say will fuel inflation. He's going to introduce a corporate tax cut. So all of this is going to happen. He has virtually unchecked power. He has a Supreme Court which looks very favourably upon his interpretation of extensive presidential power. So yes, all of this has happened, and Democrats may be powerless to do anything about it until the midterm elections, which will come at the end of 2026.
Trump's on course to win all of the 7 critical swing states, despite predictions that the two candidates were neck and neck. Trump also won a clear majority of the national popular vote. And as you heard him say there, Republicans have control of the Senate, further strengthening the power that the next president will wield. Well, let's talk to Laura Trevelyan, journalist, former BBC US anchor. Good evening to you, Laura.
Good evening, Carol. What a day.
Yes, it really has been an extraordinary day, and so much has changed since we were last speaking less than 24 hours ago. That concession speech within the past hour from Kamala Harris, what did you make of what she had to say there?
Well, very emotional for her, clearly, and for her supporters. She was speaking at Howard University, her alma mater in Washington, D.C. The crowd disappointed not to see her in the early hours of the morning, not to hear that victory speech. You could see the crowd was teary. You could see her running mate, Tim Walz, tearing up, her stepdaughter tearing up. A very difficult occasion, but she used the speech, as your clip demonstrated, to underline the fact that she accepts the result, underlining that Democrats believe in the peaceful transfer of power, something, of course, Donald Trump didn't believe in when he lost the 2020 election. But nonetheless, he has been returned to the White House. So she was extremely gracious, but she underlined that while she concedes the election, she doesn't concede the fight that fueled her campaign. But there's no disguising, Carol, Democrats are in absolute disarray today. They can't quite believe the scale of Donald Trump's comprehensive victory. He's 5 million votes ahead in the popular vote. Remember, he won so narrowly in 2016, then lost in 2020. But here he is on track to win all 7 swing states, a whopping majority in the Senate, and possibly going to take the House of Representatives as well as this big margin in the popular vote. So Democrats are back on their heels asking what went wrong, Carol.
Yeah, I mean, you could hear during that concession speech that Kamala Harris, who started off very composed, was at times struggling to contain her emotion. And it does seem to have come as a shock to them. I mean, she talked there about women's rights, but in the final result, I think I'm right in saying it was almost 45% of women who voted for Donald Trump.
Yes, I mean, the final results are still coming out. But when we were talking less than a day ago, the polls were saying that this was going to be virtually a tied race. But the fact is, Donald Trump was pretty well ahead in those Sunbelt states. Yes, it was a toss-up in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and in Michigan. But the Senate wasn't really even close in the end. So Democrats are asking, what happened? And the answer seems to be that, as we were discussing with the exit poll last night, 29% of Americans told the exit poll respondents that they feel angry about the direction of the country and state of affairs, and 43% said that they were dissatisfied. So you have so many people feeling that the economy is not working for them, that the world seems to be on fire with the Middle East and Ukraine, with wars there, that President Biden doesn't seem to be able to influence the situation in the Middle East, that they don't have control, that there's growing inequality in America, all of these things. It was a change election, and she was essentially the incumbent candidate, tied to President Biden, not able to distance herself.
And when you look at what we've heard from President-elect Trump earlier this morning, and indeed from those around him since, it does seem, though, as though he now feels very clearly that he's got this huge mandate to do what he said he was going to do during the election campaign, a pretty a strong crackdown on illegal migration, changes to the economy, putting America first. That seems to imply tariffs. He says he wants to end the wars. We'll see what he manages to deliver on that. Of course, we wait until January, don't we, in the United States? It's not like the UK, where the newly elected leader walks straight into number 10. Donald Trump's got a couple of months or so to wait now before he actually takes up the reins of power. But it does seem as though he has got a huge amount of power to put into action what he's been talking about for the past few weeks and months.
Well, and his office confirmed today, Carol, that on day one, he intends to begin that mass deportation of illegal immigrants. We'll see what that means for America's workforce, which, by the way, does rely quite heavily on illegal immigrants. He's also confirmed that he's going to introduce tariffs on imported goods to America between 10 and 20%. Again, something economists say will fuel inflation. He's going to introduce a corporate tax cut. So all of this is going to happen. He has virtually unchecked power. He has a Supreme Court which looks very favourably upon his interpretation of extensive presidential power. So yes, all of this has happened, and Democrats may be powerless to do anything about it until the midterm elections, which will come at the end of 2026.
Laura Trevelyan, journalist, former BBC US anchor. Really good to talk to you. Thanks so much. Well, with most of the results now in from the US presidential race, Donald Trump has 295 electoral college votes, with Kamala Harris on 226. Trump also won a clear majority of the national popular vote. Republicans have control of the Senate, further strengthening the power that the next president will wield. And analysts are talking about the red tsunami that swept Donald Trump to power. This after the polls had predicted a narrow Kamala Harris victory in the popular vote and were suggesting that the two rivals were neck and neck in those key swing states. Well, Charles Franklin is director of the Marquette Law School poll and joins us now. Good evening to you, Charles.
Hi, good to be here.
Well, it's good to be with you. I was just looking on your website, and you were one of those many pollsters who were looking, for example, in some of those key swing states and giving Kamala Harris a very narrow victory, perhaps only 1 percentage point. But it now appears Donald Trump is on course to win all 7 of those key swing states. Why do you think that you and other pollsters didn't see that coming?
Well, I'm going to push back on the premise some, so let's go at it. I think the polling showed Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania very close. The margins in those 3 states on average was tenths of a percentage point, tenths of a point for Harris in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. I'm sorry, Wisconsin and Michigan. Slight tenths of a point edge to Trump in Pennsylvania right at the end. But to think that polling is so accurate that tenths of a point is a meaningful prediction of victory, I think is wildly optimistic about how precise polling can ever be. But the qualitative story that we had a very close race in those 3 states, and that Georgia and North Carolina leaned a little bit towards Trump, and indeed they went for Trump. I think that story is actually quite good.
Well, Charles, I just wanted to come in there because, I've been here looking at the polls and talking about them here on Times Radio, as have colleagues. I seem to recall that all the polls in recent weeks were pointing to a very close result indeed, people saying it was too close to call. I don't see any pollsters who predicted that Trump was going to win the Electoral College by almost 70 clear Electoral College votes, that he was also going to have a clear majority in the national popular vote. The latest national popular vote polls I saw, even the poll of polls was putting Kamala Harris ahead in that.
Ahead by about 1 or 2, 1.5 points, not substantially ahead. Compare that to 2016 or even 2020, when the polls were substantially off and showed Democrats leading by a fair bit in both of those years. That's totally legitimate to point to the errors in polling there. But I think this year the magnitude of the errors is quite small, and especially the characterization of these races in the three Great Lakes states as truly too close to call was what I was hearing from the vast majority of pollsters. I'd also point out that pollsters don't predict elections the way the betting markets do or the way that some prognosticators do. We're providing the data that they may use for those predictions. But in my case, for example, we had the Wisconsin race at 50 for Harris, 49 for Trump. And it turns out Trump won it 50 to 49. I don't consider that a big error at all.
And of course, the way the Electoral College works in most states, including Wisconsin, even if you've got a narrow victory, you get all 10 of those Electoral College votes. But what do you think are the factors that you didn't spot? I mean, were there just a lot of voters who weren't admitting that they were going to vote for Donald Trump?
Again, I say there's not much error here, so I reject the premise that there was a big error that we missed.
What was it that you didn't
what we
spot?
captured very clearly was that people were very concerned about the economy, and for the entire year, Trump had an advantage on that. People were also concerned about abortion, and Harris had the big lead there, but only half as many were concerned about abortion as were concerned about the economy. And the last issue, immigration, was less important than those other two, but again, favored Trump. So I think the storyline here was really clear that Trump had advantages on the issues and had had them since last January. Harris had the advantage on the personal characteristics, being seen as the right temperament, honest and intelligent better than Trump. But in the balance between these two things, people's very negative views of Joe Biden, his job approval remains in the low 40s, and their sense that the economy had hurt them over the last 4 years, those were powerful forces. And I think not just my polling, but virtually all the polling showed those themes all year long.
We had a high turnout in most states, but we also saw this prediction that it was going to be very much a battle of the sexes, and this concern that many women voters would not be prepared to put their cross next to Donald Trump as the next president of the United States. I think I'm right in saying it was almost 45% of women did vote for Donald Trump in the end. Do you think that there was perhaps some misconceptions there then?
Yeah, I think that again is about where the pre-election polls were seeing it, but with men doing the opposite, about 55% of men going for Trump. Now, the exit polls look like men may have been a little more pro-Trump and women a slightly less pro-Harris, but we get around a 20 percentage point gap between men and women. And so that's still there, but the idea that it was a dominating influence was going to be a 30-point gap, that I don't think held up at all.